The morning sun cast long shadows across the White House lawn as President Barack Obama prepared for what would become one of the most emotionally charged meetings of his presidency. It was March 2016, and the administration had been quietly coordinating a historic visit that few knew about. The British Royal Guard, Sergeant Major William Harrison, had requested a private audience with the president through diplomatic channels. Harrison was no ordinary soldier. At 62 years old, he had served the British crown for over 4 decades, standing watch at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and other royal residences. His red uniform and towering bearskin hat had become symbols of unwavering duty and dedication. But behind that stoic exterior lay a man carrying a burden that had weighed on his heart for years. The meeting was arranged in the Oval Office, away from the usual fanfare and media attention. Obama's chief of staff had briefed him briefly about Harrison's request, mentioning only that the Guard had something personal and important to share. The president, known for his empathy and genuine interest in people's stories, had immediately agreed to the meeting. As Harrison entered the Oval Office, his posture was as rigid and disciplined as ever. He wore his dress uniform, every medal and ribbon perfectly aligned. His weathered face showed the marks of decades spent outdoors in all weather conditions, standing motionless for hours while protecting the royal family. Obama rose from behind his desk, extending his hand in greeting. "Sergeant Major Harrison, it's an honor to meet you," Obama said warmly. "Please, have a seat. I understand you have something you'd like to share with me." Harrison remained standing, for a moment, his training making it difficult to relax even in this informal setting. "Mr. President, thank you for seeing me. What I have to tell you, it's not easy, sir. It's about my grandson, James." The president gestured toward the chairs arranged near the fireplace, creating a more intimate setting for their conversation. As they sat down, Obama noticed the slight tremor in the old soldier's hands and the way his usually steady voice wavered when he mentioned his grandson's name. "Take your time, Sergeant Major," Obama encouraged gently. "I'm here to listen." Harrison took a deep breath, his military composure beginning to crack. "James was 7 years old when it happened, Mr. President. 7 years old, and he was dying of leukemia. The doctors in London had done everything they could, but his little body was giving up the fight." The president leaned forward, his attention completely focused on the man before him. Obama had always been moved by stories involving children, and as a father himself, he could see the pain etched in Harrison's weathered features. "The treatments weren't working," Harrison continued, his voice growing softer. "Chemotherapy, radiation, experimental drugs. Nothing was helping my grandson. My daughter Sarah was beside herself with grief. She's a single mother, you see, and James was her whole world. Watching him waste away in that hospital bed was destroying our entire family." Harrison paused, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a worn photograph. It showed a bright-eyed boy with a gap-toothed smile, wearing a miniature version of the Royal Guard uniform that his grandfather had given him for his 6th birthday. "This was James before he got sick," Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He used to say he wanted to be just like his grandpa when he grew up. He would march around the house pretending to guard the Queen. Sarah would laugh and call him her little soldier." Obama took the photograph, studying the young boy's face. "He looks like he has your determination, Sergeant Major." "He did, sir. Even when he was at his sickest, he never complained. Never cried about the pain or the needles or being stuck in that sterile hospital room for months. He was braver than any soldier I've ever served alongside." The emotion in Harrison's voice was becoming more apparent with each word. This man, who had trained himself to show no emotion while on duty, was struggling to maintain his composure as he spoke about his beloved grandson. "The doctors called us in one evening in October," Harrison continued. "They said we should prepare ourselves. James had maybe a week, perhaps 2 if we were lucky. They suggested we start thinking about saying goodbye." Obama felt his own heart growing heavy as he listened to the story unfolding before him. He had heard countless tragic tales during his presidency, but there was something about this grandfather's raw pain that was particularly affecting. "My daughter couldn't accept it," Harrison said. "She kept researching, calling hospitals around the world, looking for some miracle treatment that might save her son. That's when she found something that changed everything." Harrison looked directly at the president, his eyes beginning to well up with tears he had held back for years. She discovered that there was an experimental treatment being developed right here in America, at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. It was something called CAR T-cell therapy, where they would modify James's own immune cells to fight the cancer. The president nodded, familiar with some of the groundbreaking medical research being conducted in American hospitals. That sounds promising. Were you able to get James into the program? Harrison's composure finally began to crumble. That's where the miracle happened, Mr. President. And that's why I'm here today. Because what happened next? It involved you, sir. And I need you to know how it changed our lives forever. Obama sat back in his chair, completely absorbed in Harrison's story. The afternoon light filtering through the Oval Office windows seemed to dim as the weight of the moment settled between them. The president could sense that whatever was coming next would be the heart of why this decorated soldier had traveled thousands of miles to see him. Please, continue, Obama said softly, his own voice showing the emotion he was feeling. Harrison wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture that seemed almost foreign to someone so accustomed to military bearing. The experimental treatment at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia was our only hope, but there were so many obstacles. The waiting list was months long, and James didn't have months. We needed approval from multiple medical boards, insurance complications, and then there was the matter of getting him stable enough to travel. The sergeant major stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the south lawn where tourists were taking photographs beyond the fence. My daughter Sarah was making calls day and night, trying to find someone who could help expedite the process. She contacted the British Embassy, medical charities, anyone who might have connections. But every door seemed to close before it opened. Obama watched the older man struggle with his emotions, understanding that this story was leading somewhere profound. What happened then? Sarah was desperate, Harrison continued, turning back to face the president. She had heard that sometimes, in extraordinary circumstances, the American government could help facilitate medical emergencies for allies. She wrote letters to congressmen, senators, anyone she could think of. Most of them went unanswered or received polite but unhelpful responses. Harrison returned to his seat, his hands clasped tightly together. Then she did something that seemed impossible. She wrote directly to you, Mr. President. A handwritten letter that she sent to the White House, knowing it would probably never reach your desk. But she had to try. She had to exhaust every possible option to save her son. The president leaned forward, intrigued. During his time in office, he had received millions of letters from citizens around the world. But his staff had always been careful to bring the most compelling cases to his attention. In her letter, Harrison continued, Sarah explained everything. James's condition, the experimental treatment, the time constraints we were facing. She mentioned that her father was a royal guard who had dedicated his life to serving the crown, and that all she wanted was a chance to save her child. She didn't ask for money or special treatment, just help in navigating the system that might give James a fighting chance. Harrison reached into his jacket again and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. This is a copy of that letter, Mr. President. Sarah kept the original, but she made copies of everything, documenting every step of what happened next. Obama accepted the letter, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was neat, but showed signs of the emotional stress under which it had been written. As he read the desperate words of a mother trying to save her child, he could feel his own eyes beginning to moisten. 3 days after Sarah sent that letter, Harrison said, his voice growing stronger with each word, we received a phone call that changed everything. It was from your staff, Mr. President. Someone from the White House had read Sarah's letter and brought it to your attention. The president looked up from the letter, memories beginning to surface. He remembered being deeply moved by correspondence from desperate families, and his staff knew to prioritize cases involving children in medical emergencies. Your office didn't just acknowledge the letter, Harrison continued, his voice now filled with awe. Within hours, things began happening that we never could have imagined. Phone calls were made to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The State Department contacted the British Embassy. Suddenly, doors that had been firmly closed began to open. Obama set the letter down carefully, beginning to remember fragments of this particular case. His administration had occasionally intervened in humanitarian situations, especially those involving children, but he wanted to hear the full story from Harrison's perspective. But that wasn't even the most incredible part, Harrison said, his composure beginning to crack again. 2 days later, we received another call. This time it was from someone who identified themselves as calling on your direct behalf. Mr. President, they said that you had personally reviewed James's case and that arrangements were being made for immediate medical transport to Philadelphia. The old soldier's hands were shaking now as he relived the memory. Mr. President, in 40 years of military service, I had never experienced anything like what happened next. A medical aircraft was provided through coordination between your administration and the British government. James was stabilized by a team of specialists who flew to London specifically to prepare him for the journey. Obama listened intently, pieces of the memory becoming clearer. He recalled the case of a young British boy whose grandfather was a royal guard and how moved he had been by the family's situation. His staff had worked with multiple agencies to facilitate what had seemed like an impossible medical emergency. The flight to Philadelphia was like something out of a movie, Harrison continued. James was surrounded by the best medical equipment and personnel money could buy. And when we arrived at the hospital, they were waiting for us, not just the medical team, but representatives from your administration who had come to ensure everything went smoothly. Harrison stood up again, pacing slowly as the emotions overwhelmed him. My 7-year-old grandson, who had been given days to live, was suddenly receiving treatment from the world's leading experts in pediatric cancer care. All because a mother wrote a letter and you, Mr. President, decided that a little boy's life was worth your personal attention. The president felt his throat tighten as he listened to the continuing story. These were the moments that had made his presidency meaningful. The times when the power of his office could be used to make a real difference in individual lives. But there's more to this story, Harrison said, turning to face Obama directly. Much more. Because what happened during James's treatment and what happened afterward is why I'm here today. It's why I felt compelled to come and tell you personally how your actions changed not just my grandson's life, but the lives of countless other children. The president looked at this proud, emotional man standing before him and realized that whatever came next would be the moment that would stay with him, long after Harrison left the Oval Office. The silence in the Oval Office was profound as Harrison gathered himself for what was clearly the most difficult part of his story. Obama could see that the elderly soldier was fighting an internal battle between his military training to remain composed and his overwhelming need to express emotions that had been building for years. The treatment process was unlike anything we could have imagined, Harrison began, his voice steadier now but filled with wonder. The doctors at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia explained that they would be extracting James's T cells, genetically modifying them to better recognize and attack his cancer cells, then reintroducing them into his system. It was cutting-edge science that sounded like something from a science fiction movie. Obama nodded, familiar with the groundbreaking research being conducted in American medical facilities. The CAR T-cell therapy? It was still quite experimental at that time. Exactly, sir. And James was one of the youngest patients ever to receive this treatment. The medical team was cautious but optimistic. They explained that his young age actually worked in his favor. His body was more likely to respond positively to the modified cells. Harrison walked back to his chair but remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a familiar military posture. For 3 weeks we lived in that hospital. Sarah barely left James's bedside, and I spent my days walking the halls talking to other families going through similar struggles. It was there that I began to understand the true scope of what your intervention had made possible. The president leaned forward, sensing that this was where the story would take an unexpected turn. You see, Mr. President, because of the attention that James's case had received, the hospital had been able to accelerate their research timeline. The funding and resources that had been made available for his treatment had allowed them to treat several other children simultaneously. James wasn't just receiving this experimental therapy. He was part of a small group of children who were all benefiting from the program that your involvement had helped expand. Obama felt a warm feeling spreading through his chest. Often in politics, it was difficult to see the direct impact of policy decisions and interventions. But here was a tangible example of how one decision had rippled outward to help multiple families. There was a little girl named Maria, 6 years old, from Texas. Her family had been trying to get her into the program for 8 months when James arrived. Suddenly, there were resources available for her treatment too, and a boy named David from Ohio, 8 years old, whose parents had sold their house to pay for experimental treatments that weren't working. All of them were able to receive the CAR-T therapy because of the expanded program. Harrison's voice was growing stronger, filled with a pride that went beyond his personal family situation. But the most remarkable thing, Mr. President, was what happened during the treatment itself. James, despite being the sickest and youngest of the group, became like a little leader among the children. He would visit the other kids, share his toys, tell them stories about his grandfather, the Royal Guard. The president smiled, picturing this young boy bringing comfort to other sick children even while fighting for his own life. The nurses told us that James had an unusual effect on the other patients. His courage and positive attitude seemed to inspire not just the children but their families as well. There was something about this little boy who had traveled across the ocean for treatment that gave everyone hope. Harrison paused, reaching into his pocket once again. This time he pulled out a small, well-worn notebook. James started keeping a journal during his treatment. His writing wasn't perfect. He was only 7, but he documented everything. His thoughts, his fears, his hopes, and most importantly, his friendships with the other children. Obama watched as the old soldier's hands trembled slightly as he held the notebook. "Would you like to hear some of what he wrote?" "Please," Obama said softly. Harrison opened the notebook carefully as if handling a precious artifact. "Day 12, he read aloud. "The medicine makes me feel sick, but I think it's working. Maria laughed today when I told her about Grandpa's funny hat. David taught me a new card game. The doctors say our special cells are getting stronger. I hope we all get to go home together." The president felt his eyes welling up as he listened to these innocent words from a child facing such enormous challenges. "Day 18, Harrison continued. "I miss home, but I'm not scared anymore. The other kids are like my brothers and sister now. We're all fighting the same bad stuff in our bodies. Mama says I'm brave, but I think we're all brave together. Maybe being brave is easier when you're not alone." Harrison closed the notebook and looked directly at Obama. "Mr. President, what James wrote in that simple journal captures something profound about what happened in that hospital. These children, brought together by circumstances that no child should have to face, formed bonds that went beyond their individual treatments." The president wiped his eyes, not caring about maintaining his usual composed demeanor. "How did the treatment go?" "Please tell me James recovered." Harrison's face broke into the first genuine smile Obama had seen since the meeting began. "Not just James, Mr. President. All 4 children responded to the treatment. James's cancer went into complete remission after 6 weeks. Maria's tumors began shrinking within a month. David's blood counts normalized for the first time in over a year. It was like witnessing a series of miracles." Obama leaned back in his chair, feeling a wave of relief and joy wash over him. But he could sense from Harrison's demeanor that there was still more to this remarkable story. "The doctors called it unprecedented," Harrison continued. "They had never seen such uniformly positive responses to the treatment, especially in such young patients. They began studying not just the medical aspects of the children's recovery, but also the psychological and social factors that might have contributed to their success." The old soldier sat down finally, his rigid military posture softening as he continued. "That's when they discovered something that would change pediatric cancer treatment protocols around the world. Something that started with your decision to help one little British boy, but grew into something much larger and more significant than any of us could have imagined." Obama was completely absorbed in Harrison's narrative, realizing that what had started as a simple humanitarian gesture had evolved into something far more significant. The president could see that the elderly soldier was building toward a revelation that would explain why this meeting was so important to him. The research team at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia began documenting everything about the 4 children's treatment and recovery. Harrison continued, his voice filled with excitement despite his emotional state. They noticed that the children who had been treated together, who had formed these strong friendships during their therapy, were showing recovery rates that exceeded all previous data for their types of cancers. The president leaned forward, his policy mind immediately grasping the implications. They were studying the social and emotional factors alongside the medical treatment? Exactly, sir. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the lead researcher, began investigating what she called the peer support phenomenon. she discovered that James, Maria, David, and the fourth child, a girl named Sophie from Canada, had created an informal support network that was actively contributing to their healing process. Harrison opened James's journal again, flipping to a page near the middle. Listen to this entry from day 25. Today, Maria was really scared about her next treatment. We all held hands and told her stories about what we're going to do when we get better. David said he's going to play baseball again. Sophie wants to learn to ride a horse. I want to see Grandpa in his uniform at the palace. When we talked about our dreams, Maria stopped crying and said she wants to become a doctor to help other kids like us. Obama felt his throat tighten again. The wisdom and compassion in these children's words was extraordinary. Dr. Chen realized that these children were unconsciously developing coping mechanisms that were enhancing their treatment outcomes. Harrison explained, their emotional support for each other was actually measurably improving their physical responses to the therapy. They were healing each other as much as the medicine was healing them. The president could see where this was leading, and the implications were staggering. They developed a new treatment protocol based on this discovery? They did, Mr. President, and it started with your decision to help my grandson. Harrison's voice was filled with gratitude and awe. Dr. Chen worked with her team to design what they called community-based pediatric cancer therapy. Instead of treating children in isolation, they began grouping young patients together, encouraging them to form supportive relationships during their treatment. Harrison stood and began pacing again, his excitement overriding his military discipline. The results were remarkable. Over the next 2 years, children who received treatment under this new protocol showed a 30% higher recovery rate than those treated individually. The program began expanding to other hospitals across America, then internationally. Obama was stunned. He had signed off on helping one sick child, never imagining it would lead to a breakthrough in pediatric cancer treatment. This protocol is being used widely now, in over 200 hospitals worldwide. Mr. President, the Philadelphia Protocol, as it's known in medical circles, has helped thousands of children not just survive their cancer but thrive during treatment. And it all began because you chose to read a desperate mother's letter and take action. Harrison returned to his seat, pulling out another document from his jacket. This is a research paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2018. Dr. Chen's team documented the entire development of the protocol, including its origins in James's case. They specifically mention the crucial role that government intervention played in making the initial research possible. The president accepted the paper, scanning the abstract and introduction. The scientific language was complex, but the implications were clear. His decision to help one family had contributed to a medical breakthrough that was saving lives around the world. But there's something else. Mr. President, Harrison said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, something personal that I've never told anyone. Not even Sarah or James. Obama looked up from the research paper, seeing that Harrison was struggling with whatever he was about to share. During those weeks in Philadelphia, while James was receiving treatment, I had time to think about my life in ways I never had before. For 40 years I had stood guard protecting the royal family, believing that my service was the most important thing I could do. I was proud of my duty, proud of my dedication to the crown. The old soldier's hands were shaking again as he continued, but watching my grandson fight for his life, and seeing how your intervention had not only saved him, but was leading to breakthroughs that would help thousands of other children, I realized something profound about the nature of true service. Obama waited patiently, sensing that Harrison was approaching the emotional core of why he had requested this meeting. Standing guard at a palace, protecting people who were already surrounded by security and privilege, suddenly seemed small compared to what I had witnessed in that hospital. Harrison said, your decision to help James wasn't about duty or protocol or political advantage. It was about using your power to serve someone who had no power, to help a child who was dying. Tears were now flowing freely down the elderly soldier's face. For the first time in my adult life, I understood what it meant to serve something larger than tradition or institution. I understood what it meant to serve humanity itself. The president felt his own emotions overwhelming him as he watched this proud, disciplined man break down in front of him. But Harrison wasn't finished. When we returned to London after James's successful treatment, I couldn't go back to my old life as if nothing had changed. I couldn't stand at my post, pretending that guarding a building was the most important thing I could do with my remaining years. Harrison wiped his eyes and looked directly at Obama. I made a decision that shocked everyone who knew me. Mr. President, after 40 years of service to the Crown, I requested early retirement, and I used my pension and savings to start something that I believe honors what you did for my family. The President was completely absorbed in Harrison's story, understanding that whatever the elderly soldier had done with his life after his grandson's recovery was the real reason for this emotional meeting in the Oval Office. The atmosphere in the Oval Office had become intensely emotional as Harrison prepared to reveal what he had done with his life after his grandson's miraculous recovery. Obama could see that this revelation was the reason the elderly soldier had traveled thousands of miles to meet with him personally. "I established a foundation, Mr. President," Harrison said, his voice steady despite the tears still visible in his eyes. "The James Harrison Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Support. But it's not just another medical charity. It's something specifically designed to replicate what happened during my grandson's treatment, the peer support system that proved so crucial to his recovery." Obama sat forward, deeply moved by the direction Harrison's story was taking. The idea that this man had completely changed his life's direction because of their brief interaction was both humbling and inspiring. The foundation operates in partnership with children's hospitals across Europe and North America. Harrison continued, "We identify young cancer patients who are beginning experimental treatments, and we create support groups similar to what James experienced in Philadelphia. We call them courage circles." Harrison reached into his jacket once more, this time pulling out a tablet device. With slightly shaking fingers, he opened it to show Obama a collection of photographs. "These are some of the children who have participated in our Courage Circles program over the past 5 years." The president took the tablet, scrolling through dozens of photos showing young children of various ages, all bald from chemotherapy, but smiling and laughing together in hospital playrooms, garden settings, and specially designed activity centers. "We've created a network of over 50 Courage Circles in hospitals across 12 countries," Harrison explained with evident pride. "Each circle consists of 4 to 6 children undergoing similar treatments, along with their families. They meet regularly, share their experiences, support each other through the difficult days, and celebrate together during the good ones." Obama continued looking through the photos, each image showing children who were clearly very sick but who had found joy and strength in their connections with other young patients. "This is remarkable, Sergeant Major. How many children have been helped by your program?" "Over 800 children have participated in Courage Circles since we began in 2017, Harrison replied, his military bearing returning as he discussed the operational aspects of his foundation. "Of those, 712 have gone into remission or have been declared cancer-free. The remaining children, well, they've all reported that their participation in the circles gave them comfort and courage during their treatments, even when the medical outcomes weren't what we had hoped for." The president paused his scrolling, looking at a particular photo that showed a young boy who bore a striking resemblance to the picture Harrison had shown him earlier of James. "Is this?" "Yes, sir. That's James, taken last month. He's 13 now, healthy, and one of our most active volunteers. He visits new Courage Circles to share his story and help other children understand that they're not alone in their fight." Obama studied the photo of the teenage James, seeing the same determined expression he had noticed in the earlier picture, but now accompanied by the wisdom that comes from having faced and overcome extraordinary challenges at such a young age. "James wrote something last year that I'd like to share with you," Harrison said, taking back the tablet and navigating to what appeared to be a blog post. He started writing about his experiences to help other children and families going through similar situations. Harrison began reading from the screen. "When I was 7 years old, I was dying. I don't remember being scared about dying, but I remember being scared about being alone. The scariest part wasn't the needles or the machines or even the pain. The scariest part was thinking that nobody else understood what I was going through." Obama listened intently as Harrison continued reading his grandson's words. "But then I met Maria, David, and Sophie in the hospital in Philadelphia. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. We were all fighting the same monster, and we were fighting it together. We laughed together, cried together, and got better together. That's when I learned that sharing your fears makes them smaller, and sharing your hopes makes them bigger. Harrison paused, visibly moved by his grandson's mature reflection on his childhood experience. James goes on to write about the foundation and the courage circles. Harrison continued. But here's the part that I wanted you to hear personally. My grandfather always told me that President Obama saved my life by helping me get to the hospital in America. But I think President Obama did something even more important than that. He showed us that powerful people can choose to care about powerless people. He showed us that one person's decision to help can change not just one life, but hundreds and hundreds of lives. The president felt his emotions overwhelming him again. To hear that his simple act of compassion had inspired not just a medical breakthrough, but an entirely new approach to helping sick children was more meaningful than any political victory he had achieved. But James wasn't finished, Harrison said, scrolling to another section of the blog post. He wrote, "Because of what President Obama did for my family, my grandfather learned that protecting people isn't just about standing guard. Sometimes, protecting people means reaching out to help them when they need it most. Now our foundation helps hundreds of children feel less alone when they're fighting cancer. That all started because one president decided to read one letter from one scared mother." Harrison closed the tablet and set it aside, looking directly at Obama with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. "Mr. President, I came here today not just to thank you for saving my grandson's life. I came to tell you that your act of compassion created ripples that are still spreading across the world. Every child who finds courage in a courage circle, every family that finds support during their darkest hours, every medical breakthrough that comes from the continued research into peer support therapy, all of it traces back to your decision to help one little boy you had never met." The president was struggling to maintain his composure as he fully grasped the magnitude of what Harrison was telling him. A simple humanitarian gesture had grown into a global movement that was continuing to save and improve lives years later. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," Harrison said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Something that will explain why I felt I had to come here personally to share this story with you." The tension in the Oval Office was palpable as Harrison prepared to share what was clearly the most significant part of his story. Obama could see that whatever the elderly soldier was about to reveal had been weighing heavily on his mind, and was the true reason he had felt compelled to request this private meeting. "3 months ago, I received a phone call that changed everything I thought I knew about the impact of your intervention," Harrison began, his voice trembling with emotion. "It was from Dr. Chen at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She had been tracking the long-term outcomes of the peer support therapy protocols that had developed from James's case." Obama waited patiently, sensing that this final revelation would be the most powerful part of Harrison's story. "Dr. Chen told me that the research team had been conducting a comprehensive study of pediatric cancer treatment outcomes over the past decade. They had been comparing survival rates, quality of life measures, and long-term health outcomes between different treatment approaches worldwide." Harrison stood up and walked to the window again, but this time he seemed to be drawing strength from the view rather than seeking comfort. "What they discovered, Mr. President, was staggering. The peer support protocols that evolved from James's treatment, the protocols now used in over 200 hospitals, had not just improved individual recovery rates. They had fundamentally changed the trajectory of pediatric cancer care globally." The president leaned forward, anticipating what was coming, but still unprepared for the full scope of what Harrison was about to reveal. "The study showed that children who received treatment under peer support protocols had a 45% higher 5-year survival rate than those treated with traditional isolated approaches," Harrison said, turning back to face Obama. "But more than that, these children showed dramatically better long-term psychological outcomes, lower rates of secondary cancers, and stronger immune systems as they moved into adulthood." Obama felt his breath catch as he began to understand the true magnitude of what Harrison was telling him. Dr. Chen estimated that over the past 5 years alone, the protocols inspired by James's case have contributed to saving or significantly improving the lives of over 12,000 children worldwide. Harrison continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. 12,000 children, Mr. President. 12,000 families who have been spared the devastating loss that we thought we would have to endure. The president stood up abruptly, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of these numbers. The idea that one decision, made in response to a desperate mother's letter, had ultimately saved thousands of lives was almost too much to comprehend. But that's still not the end of the story, Harrison said, approaching Obama with the tablet again. Dr. Chen's research team made one more discovery that I needed to share with you personally. Harrison opened the tablet to a scientific chart showing survival rates over time. They tracked the children who had been in James's original peer support group: Maria, David, Sophie, and James himself. All four are now thriving teenagers. But more importantly, all four have chosen to dedicate their lives to helping other children facing similar challenges. The screen showed four recent photographs, teenage versions of the children Obama had been hearing about throughout Harrison's story. Maria is now 16 and has already been accepted to an early admission program at Johns Hopkins University, where she plans to study pediatric oncology, Harrison explained. David, 15, has started a nonprofit organization that provides sports equipment and coaching to children in cancer treatment. Sophie, also 15, has become an advocate for expanded access to experimental cancer treatments in rural areas. Harrison paused at the final photo, showing James in what appeared to be a hospital setting, but this time wearing scrubs rather than a patient gown. And James, Harrison said with obvious pride, spends his weekends volunteering at children's hospitals, helping to establish new courage circles and mentoring newly diagnosed children. At 13 years old, he has already helped over 100 children begin their treatment journeys with courage and hope, instead of fear and isolation. Obama studied the photo of the young man James had become, seeing in his face the same determination that had carried him through his own battle with cancer, now directed toward helping others. Dr. Chen told me something that brought me to tears, Harrison continued. She said that in her 30 years of pediatric cancer research, she had never seen anything like the ripple effects that had originated from James's case. Not just the medical breakthroughs, not just the thousands of lives saved, but the creation of what she called a generation of survivors who are committed to lifting up the next generation. Harrison closed the tablet and set it aside, his eyes now flowing with tears of joy rather than sadness. Mr. President, when you decided to help my grandson, you didn't just save one life. You started a movement. You created a legacy of compassion that is growing and spreading and touching lives in ways that none of us could have imagined. The president felt his own tears flowing freely now, no longer concerned about maintaining his usual composed demeanor. The story he had been hearing was not just about one family's gratitude, but about the profound impact that single acts of compassion could have when they inspired others to carry the kindness forward. But there's one final thing I need to tell you, Harrison said, his voice now filled with a deep, abiding peace, something that explains why I felt I had to come here today. Why I had to look you in the eye and tell you this story personally. Obama wiped his eyes and nodded, understanding that Harrison was about to share the deepest truth behind his remarkable journey to the Oval Office. Last month, James asked me a question that I couldn't answer, Harrison said. He asked me if I thought President Obama knew what his kindness had created. He wondered if you understood that your decision to help one little boy had grown into something that was helping thousands of children around the world. The elderly soldier straightened his shoulders, his military bearing returning one final time. I realized that I couldn't answer my grandson's question because I didn't know, and I couldn't live with not knowing whether you understood the magnitude of the gift you had given to the world. So I came here to tell you. I came here to make sure you knew that your compassion changed everything. The silence in the Oval Office stretched for several moments as both men struggled to process the emotional weight of Harrison's complete story. Obama stood by his desk, tears still visible on his face, trying to comprehend the full scope of what the elderly royal guard had just shared with him. The afternoon light had shifted, casting a golden glow through the windows that seemed to emphasize the profound significance of this moment. Sergeant Major, Obama finally said, his voice thick with emotion, I need you to know that in 8 years as president, through all the legislation passed, all the international agreements signed, all the crises managed, nothing has moved me more deeply than what you've just shared with me. Harrison stood at attention, the instinctive military response to being addressed by a head of state, but his eyes remained soft with the tears he had shed while telling his story. When I read your daughter's letter all those years ago, Obama continued, I saw a desperate mother trying to save her child. I never imagined that helping one little boy would lead to medical breakthroughs that would save thousands of other children. I certainly never imagined it would inspire someone to completely change their life's direction in order to serve others. The president walked around his desk and stood directly in front of Harrison. What you've done with your life after James's recovery, the foundation you've built, the lives you've touched, that's not my legacy. That's yours. You took whatever small assistance I was able to provide and turned it into something extraordinary. Harrison's composure finally broke completely. The man who had spent 40 years standing motionless at royal residences, trained never to show emotion while on duty, began sobbing openly in the Oval Office. Mr. President, you changed my understanding of what it means to serve. You showed me that true power is using your position to help those who have no position at all. Obama placed his hand on Harrison's shoulder, moved beyond words by the depth of this man's transformation and dedication. You've taken that lesson and multiplied it 1,000-fold. Every child who finds courage in a courage circle, every family that discovers they're not alone in their struggle, every medical breakthrough that comes from the peer support research, that's all because you chose to turn your gratitude into action. The two men stood together in the golden afternoon light, both transformed by this conversation in ways they were still processing. Obama understood that he was witnessing something rare in the presidency, the opportunity to see the long-term, positive consequences of a single decision to show compassion to a stranger. James wanted to know if you understood what your kindness had created, Harrison said, finally regaining some of his composure.
What should I tell him?
Obama smiled through his tears, thinking about the 13-year-old boy who had survived cancer and was now dedicating his young life to helping other children face similar challenges. Tell James that his grandfather taught me something today about the true nature of leadership. Tell him that sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is not to solve every problem, but to inspire others to become problem solvers themselves. Harrison nodded, understanding the profound truth in Obama's words. And tell him, Obama continued, that learning about the James Harrison Foundation and the Courage Circles has reminded me why I entered public service in the first place. It's not about the power or the prestige. It's about the possibility that one act of kindness can ripple outward in ways we never imagined, touching lives and changing futures long after we're gone. The president walked back to his desk and picked up a piece of official White House stationery. I want to write something for James, and for all the children who have been helped by your foundation. As Obama wrote, Harrison watched in amazement, still processing the fact that this powerful leader had been so deeply moved by their story. This is for your grandson, Obama said, handing Harrison the handwritten note. But it's also for you because what you've accomplished deserves recognition at the highest levels. Harrison accepted the note with trembling hands, reading the president's words. To James Harrison and all the brave children in courage circles around the world. Your courage inspires leaders. Your compassion heals hearts, and your determination proves that the strongest people are often the smallest ones. Thank you for showing us that surviving something difficult is just the beginning. The real heroism comes in helping others survive it too. With admiration and respect, Barack Obama. Mr. President, Harrison said, there's something I need to ask of you. A favor that would mean everything to James and to all the children in our programs. Obama nodded immediately. Whatever you need. Would you consider visiting one of our courage circles? Not as a political event or a photo opportunity, but simply as the person whose kindness started this movement. The children would be honored to meet you, and I think you would be amazed to see what your compassion has grown into. The president didn't hesitate. I would be honored to visit. In fact, I'd like to make it a regular part of my post-presidency activities. What you've built deserves not just my support, but my active involvement. Harrison's face lit up with joy. James will be thrilled. He's often said that meeting you would be the greatest honor of his life. The honor will be mine, Obama replied sincerely. Meeting the boy whose courage started a movement that has saved thousands of lives? That's not an honor. That's a privilege. As their meeting drew to a close, both men understood that something profound had taken place in the Oval Office that afternoon. Harrison had come to express gratitude and share information, but he had also reminded the president of the most important aspects of leadership and service. "Sergeant Major," Obama said as Harrison prepared to leave, "you came here today to tell me about the impact of one decision I made years ago. But you've given me something much more valuable. You've reminded me that the true measure of leadership isn't what we accomplish during our time in office. It's what we inspire others to accomplish long after our time in power has ended." Harrison stood at attention one final time. But now his military bearing was combined with the peaceful satisfaction of a man who had found his true calling in life. "Mr. President, serving my country for 40 years taught me about duty. But knowing you and seeing what your compassion created taught me about purpose. Thank you for showing me the difference." As Harrison left the Oval Office, Obama stood by the window watching the elderly soldier walk across the South Lawn. In his hand, he still held the worn photograph of 7-year-old James in his miniature Royal Guard uniform, and he found himself smiling through his tears as he thought about the remarkable journey that had brought them all to this moment. The president understood that he had just experienced one of the most important meetings of his entire presidency, not because of any policy implications or political significance, but because he had been reminded of the fundamental truth that had drawn him to public service: the power of compassion to change the world, one life at a time.